Well, there is that real possibility. Our latest survey of supply managers in 9 states, that index, which is leading economic indicator, was below growth neutral, lowest level since last May. So this is looking a little troubling. But I think this is not what's going on here. Is our regional data is not matching up to the national data. And I think what that's really reflecting is a lot of agriculture, of course, in the Mid-American region, which stretches from North Dakota and Minnesota in the north to Oklahoma and Arkansas in the south. That area is a lot of agriculture, and agricultural income is down by as much as 30 to 35% from last year. So we're seeing some of that. Also, this what I would call alternative energy euphoria is sort of, it's a lot of talk right now and not as much action, meaning wind energy, we saw a lot of activity, now we're seeing less activity. Corn-based ethanol, again, that sector is not doing as well. So the survey is probably going to, the national numbers that came out, that are coming out, are going to probably be more positive than the regional numbers, the 9-state region that we survey.
Now, one state, Minnesota, saw its leading economic indicator rise.
It did. It was one among only 2 states, Oklahoma, the other state, which had an increase. But Minnesota is the only state with an increase and an index above 50. So Minnesota is a lot more like the nation than the rest of the region. It's not as dependent on agriculture. Much larger manufacturing sector. In fact, the largest manufacturing sector in the region is Minnesota. Missouri second there. So that's a lot of it. We're seeing Minnesota coming out of the housing downturn. Of course, what we're seeing for the region is the housing downturn was not as significant in the 9-state region that we survey. Likewise, we're not seeing the real bounce that we're seeing, for example, in Minnesota and Missouri, 2 states that are much more like the nation than the other 7 states.
Now you talk about the value of the dollar, the weak value of the dollar. Will that actually, in a sense, have a positive impact on the region?
It will. I hear a lot of complaining, a lot of wrenching sounds out there, but it's more positive than negative right now. What that does is make U.S. goods more competitive abroad, cheaper. And certainly in Europe, Canada, Mexico, not as much, of course, in China where the currency is pegged, but it makes them more competitive, and that's going to serve our interest in terms of agriculture, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of mining also. So those industries will be positively influenced by a cheaper dollar. Of course, it makes imports more expensive, and we're seeing that right now with import prices going up. Imports came down for the month. That's an important reading. The U.S. economy still sort of stammering along, struggling. Negatives are less negative than they were. I wouldn't go as far as to say this is positive for the nation. The region, a little more difficult right now. And again, I'm back to an agricultural sector that's not as strong as we'd like to see, and certainly biofuels and alternative energies as well.
But could the low value of the dollar end up benefiting employment, which has been struggling?
I think it will. I think a lower value of the dollar is going to serve us at least, now again, not dropping off the table, a dollar that we call it an orderly decline. That's often stated. I'll call it the same thing, an orderly decline, meaning maybe the euro going up in value, the dollar coming down to where we're maybe as high as $1.60 per euro. Now that's getting into record territory, record low territory for the dollar, but that would be good, at least at this point in time. Now I wouldn't like to see it weaken much more than that, though, against the euro, for example.
What else about the survey that you saw that you think could be signaling a double-dip recession?
Well, inventories still weak for the 14th month in a row. Supply managers trimmed inventory, so even though the outlook is positive, the business confidence, they tell us they're positive about the economy. Well, they're not acting that way when it talks about filling inventories. Their inventories are at record low levels. That's certainly troubling. Again, back to the earlier point about employment, still not as good as we'd like to see. Certainly below growth neutral for most of the states. for for the region. So that's certainly problematic, if I can use that term.
One of the questions I think you asked the supply managers this time was whether or not they expected to see pay increases or layoffs.
Oh yeah, that's as for like many of us out there, the supply managers, purchasing managers, and these are individuals that are buying for their company. If they're buying for their company, then it's going to show up in the economy later on. So it's a leading economic indicator. They don't expect, 44% of them expect no raise this year. And about the same proportion expect some layoffs continuing. So those are putting that together. We're still, at best, moving sideways, and I'd say sideways and down a bit for the region, sideways and up a bit for the nation.
Okay. To sum up the report?
To sum up our monthly report, this is the released on the first business day of the month. We've been doing it now for 15 long years, good years, 15 good years, but we've been doing that, Cindy, you and I, and to sum it up, it was not a good report. It's just there is the possibility of dipping back into recession territory, and I'm very concerned about that for the region. And of course, I'm even concerned that it stimulates the federal government to do some things they probably shouldn't be doing. I think this will solve itself. It will, but if you get cash for caulking, I'm hearing now. We had cash for clunkers, cash for caulking. Now, I really don't support that. I think the federal government needs to relax. This economy will be back on the mend, but it's not going to be back on the mend with too much meddling by the federal government.